Two men have held an entire nation at gunpoint. Hello and welcome. I'm Geeta Mohan and you're watching World Today, where we will be focusing on the Sudan conflict that has left many dead, thousands injured, scores of people homeless and many foreign nationals stranded. At a time when the people of Sudan were looking at transition of power from civilian military establishment to an elected civilian government, two rival generals, General Abdel Fattah Burhan and General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, aren't willing to give up power, leading to a major humanitarian catastrophe.
Death, destruction, loss. Sudan has descended into complete chaos, and violence after fighting erupted in Sudan's capital city, Khartoum, and across the country this month as powerful rival military factions battle for control of the African nation and its future. The conflict represents a power struggle between two Sudanese generals, General Abdel Fattah Burhan, who leads the Sudanese military, and General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, who leads the Rapid Support Forces, a paramilitary group that is vying for more power in the government.
People of Sudan are afraid that there might be unethical practices in the war against civilians and using civilians as human shields. These are the fears after the evacuation of expats.
Sudan, a country in Northeast Africa, bordering the Red Sea, a resource-rich country, has had a troubled past. Tension had been building for months between Sudan's army and the RSF, which together had toppled the government of long-ruling autocrat Omar al-Bashir in a popular uprising in an October 2021 coup. The military and the protesters reached an agreement to create the Sovereignty Council, a body with a mix of military and civilian officials that would oversee elections in Sudan by the end of 2023. Abdullah Hamdok was appointed Prime Minister for the transitional period. However, tensions arose during negotiations to integrate the RSF into the country's military as part of plans to restore civilian rule. The key question being, who would be subordinate to whom under the new hierarchy? Meanwhile, scores of foreign nationals are stranded in the capital city of Khartoum, where the fight is the fiercest. Countries have been working hard to evacuate their nationals and help partner nations in rescue efforts as well. A brief 72-hour ceasefire had been declared to allow for evacuations to take place, with negotiations currently underway to extend its duration. But the RSF did not completely comply.
I am in constant contact with the parties to the conflict, and I've called on them to de-escalate tensions and to return to the negotiating table. We will continue our efforts with our partners to secure a permanent halt to the fighting as soon as possible.
Stranded foreigners, including diplomats and aid workers in the country, with the UK, US, France, Germany, Italy, Greece, Egypt, Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states among those closing embassies and racing to evacuate their nationals.
The belligerent parties must implement an immediate and unconditional ceasefire, adhere to international law, allow unhindered humanitarian access, and respect the will of the people of Sudan to return to a path of civilian rule.
The war that erupted on April 15 has turned residential areas into war zones, killing at least 459 people, wounding over 4,000, according to the WHO. Facing water and power cuts and suffering from food shortage in a nation already reliant on aid. The UN Security Council met after UN Chief Antonio Guterres urged its 15 members to use their clout to return Sudan to the path of democratic transition. The World Health Organization said there was a high risk of biological hazard in the Sudanese capital Khartoum after one of the warring parties seized a national laboratory holding measles and cholera pathogens and ejected the technician.
The main referral central public health lab, and there is high risk of biological hazards, because in that land we have polio isolate, we have measles isolates, as well as cholera isolates. So with the electricity shut down and with no technician taking care of all these, the risk of biological hazard is high in Khartoum because of the occupations of the lab by one of the fighting parties. It is not really necessary to say which party.
The future of this war-torn nation looks uncertain. Both sides claim control over key sites and have said military resolution is the only way out. While resource-rich and strategically located Sudan's neighbors, Egypt and South Sudan have offered to mediate, all that is certain is more misery for the Sudanese people.
In a bizarre case of cult practice, the Kenyan authorities have exhumed mass graves of people starving themselves to death. Here's a report.
The discovery of mass graves in Shakahola forest near the coastal town of Malindi has shocked Kenya and the world. Guided by a cult leader who's also a controversial preacher at the Good News International Church, Paul Mackenzie indoctrinated his followers and asked them to abandon earthly life. More than 73 bodies have been exhumed since the search began on April 13, following reports of 2 children being starved and suffocated to death by their parents at the behest of Mackenzie.
When we got here, when we learned the extent to which these graves are, scattered all over, we made phone calls to Nairobi, we called the higher authorities, and we explained to them the magnitude of the massacre that has been happening here.
Kenyan President William Ruto condemned the action as an act of terrorism and vowed to bring justice.
Terrorists use religion to advance their heinous acts. People like Mr. Mackenzie are using religion to do exactly the same thing.
Relatives of victims mourned the death and were shocked at Mackenzie's power to manipulate their dear ones.
My children are dead. I know that for sure. The young man who told me about my children had been living in the forest since 2021. They told me the names of my children, and they did not even know me. They told me my children had been starved to death. We had problems until one day she came and took the kids and ran away. I followed and found out that she was living close to Pastor Mackenzie's church. I took the children back. She then returned home and pretended she was content. I warned her that if she goes back to that church, she should not return here. If you decide to go, leave my children here.
Paul Mackenzie was arrested on April 15 after 4 bodies were recovered, feared to have died of starvation. He denied any wrongdoing and said he had shut down his church in 2019. According to government sources, the 800-acre of Shakahola forest has been sealed and declared a crime scene. With Neha Kumari, Bureau Report, India Today.
Now, the Walt Disney Company has sued Florida Republican Governor Ron DeSantis, asking a court to overturn state efforts to control Disney World and intensifying a battle between a global entertainment giant and a likely White House contender. In its lawsuit, Disney accused DeSantis and his supporters of illegally using the state government to punish a company for voicing an opinion that should be protected by free speech rights. The skirmish began last year after Disney criticized a Florida measure banning classroom discussion of sexuality and gender identity with younger children. Florida lawmakers passed legislation that ended Disney's virtual autonomy in Central Florida, where the Disney World theme parks attract millions of visitors each year. Disney's lawsuit alleges that a newly formed DeSantis-appointed tourist board violated the company's contract rights without just compensation of due process. The company is asking the court to declare Florida's legislative action unlawful. DeSantis has argued that Disney, which employs roughly 75,000 people in Florida, had been enjoying unfair advantages for decades. And here are some other stories from across the world in World at a Glance.
Turkey's Erdogan cancels 2 days campaigning as crucial elections loom after he fell ill during a live televised interview on Tuesday. This comes as a setback for Erdogan, who is hoping to extend his power for the third time in Turkey. The Taliban has killed the ISIS-K leader responsible for the suicide bombing at the international airport in Kabul, Afghanistan, in August 2021 that had killed 13 US troops and 170 civilians. Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif secured a vote of confidence from the National Assembly on Thursday, with 180 lawmakers reposing full confidence in his leadership as the Premier. Sharif managed to get 180 out of 336 votes in his favour. The resolution for the trust vote was moved by Foreign Minister Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, who is part of the coalition government. Author Jean Carroll has accused former US President Donald Trump of sexually assaulting her in a New York department store changing room in 1996, and then accused her of lying when she went public with her allegations in a book. Trump has completely denied the accusations against him. Ex-Fugees musician Prakazrael Pras Michel has been found guilty on 10 counts, which include corruption stemming from allegations that he used money to peddle influence in the US for China. The rapper now faces prison time. Montana Republicans barred transgender lawmaker Zoe Zephyr from the House floor for rest of the 2023 session in retaliation for her rebuking colleagues and then participating in protest after they voted to ban gender-affirming care for children.
Motion, vote aye.
Pope Francis has decided to give women rights to vote at upcoming meetings of bishops. The modification in the rules governing the Synod of Bishops, a papal advisory board, will now give 5 religious sisters voting rights, although men will still cast majority of the votes at the influential gathering.
That's all in this edition of World Today, but before I go, I leave you with visuals of South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol, who briefly sang for the crowd at the White House State Dinner hosted by US President Joe Biden on Wednesday night. Yoon sang a rendition of American Pie, one of his favorite songs, to raucous applause. Goodbye and take care.
And I really felt my chains, that I could make those people dance, and maybe they'd be happy for a while.